Welcome to this week's devlog video for Lumbermill. It's been a busy one, both for development on the game and outside of this project for me as well. This week began not with development, but with a trip to Berlin to visit a friend. There's so much to see there and we really fit a lot into the 2 days I had. When I returned, I got back to work on the game. I know I said last week I'd implement the splitter this week, but I really struggled with coming up with a design that looked half decent. I actually wasted a few days just drawing and redrawing and redrawing. The problem I had was that due to the resolution of the sprites, I can't really fit a lot of detail into them without it looking bad, as each pixel takes up quite a lot of space. So I need to figure out a way to make things look detailed without looking messy. I eventually stopped after my 4th proper attempt and decided to instead draw something a bit less complex. I decided to implement rails, which will be used in the game to transport large numbers of items at once across the map. This will be used when transporting items to merchants, which will be randomly distributed across the forest. I needed 6 variations in total, 1 for each possible angle the rails could face. This is what all the sprites ended up looking like. Once I'd drawn them, I switched them out with the conveyor belt sprites to see what they'd look like in the game. I'm pretty pleased with them. The only problem is the sleepers aren't all evenly spaced, but that's not a major issue at the moment. You'll notice that on all the corner sprites the rails form a square. I did this so that there's no need to animate a cart around every corner. As there's only one person working on the game, I'm not sure I'd have the time to make all the animations. Next I had to draw a cart to go on the rails. I experimented with the tarpaulin covering at first, which I eventually decided to scrap. I'll eventually be adding a few different stages for the cart to show it getting filled with items, but that's not an urgent feature at the moment. I always test my sprites in Unity to make sure I'm happy with them before committing to them. And you can see here I'm just dragging it along the rail manually and I think it looks fine. Once I'd started coding the actual rails rather than using the conveyor belt code, I ran into a few problems. Firstly, the rails wouldn't link up on corners but would be correctly oriented on straights. When I did a bit more research into this, I discovered that all the corners were correctly calculated in Unity, but the sprites weren't updating when new rails were placed. Here you can see as I step through the rails connected to each other, the directions represent the direction the rail should be facing, which are all correct. That was actually quite easy to fix in the code, and I just needed to get the game to refresh both conveyor belts and rails when they're placed, and not just conveyors. It took forever to spot the problem, but was just an adjustment to an if statement, which you can see here. Next, I wrote the script for the cart to follow the track. I'd like to get the cart to move consistently, as a train would, but as the motion is linked to the speed that time passes, I'll need to implement that once I've added the options to speed up or slow down time, as any changes I make now could be useless when I do that. Lastly, I just made some small changes to improve some previously implemented parts of the game. First, I changed the old inventory system, which used to list each item held in storage individually. It now displays a count of each item type. This makes the inventory much easier to read and paves the way for when I implement icons for each item in storage. I then adjusted conveyor belts so that they can now move one after the other without a gap in between. This was happening previously as the next conveyor belt would need to be empty in order for an item to progress to it. I fixed this by progressing items from the end of the conveyor first, and then working backwards, moving each item along in turn. I also adjusted storage to do the same thing, so now everything happens much more quickly. That's all for this week. Please subscribe if you liked the video, and I'll see you next week.